Thank you. So I've introduced myself really already. I want to thank you all for coming here and for giving me the opportunity really to stand up here and facilitate this really important process. And I'll tell you a little bit about, I think, how I got to be where I am over the course of the presentation. So here's what I want to talk about today. The talk is called Psychedelics, Psychotherapy, and Change. And so, I want to examine the idea of change. There's a question mark on that bullet, because there is some question as to whether change actually takes place. In psychotherapy, some studies have said a third get better, a third get worse, and a third stay the same. There's more nuance to that, sort of apocryphal finding, but it's certainly thought-provoking. And the question of change, as an activity, whether change really is, of course, the goal of psychotherapy. And psychedelics, of course, there's this huge promise that we all, sometimes we dance around it, sometimes enthusiasts will speak to it outright. But, the idea is that psychedelics are supposed to transform us in some fundamental way. Transformative change, not just an insight, but something that really makes us different than we would have been if we hadn't taken the psychedelic. And I'm not sure if that's true. I don't know if there's any data on that. So, I want to explore that a little bit too. And the reason I'm interested in psychotherapy and psychedelics is because my use of psychedelics has informed my personality theory, because, I've seen my own. And so, I apply it to my clinical practice. So it affects my personality theory and, of course, my clinical philosophy, my clinical practice. The way I deal with people is, I try to be soulful, I try to be present, that sort of thing. And to me, that mindset, I was trained in a much more precise kind of a way. I was trained at the master's level to be one of those annoying therapists that basically repeats what you have to say with a little bit of extra nuance. And you ask them a question, and they say, well, how do you feel about that question? Or reflection. I was trained in that methodology. And now I, of course, do the exact opposite. I'm there and present. It's easier to use the technique. It's more, you're naked when you're real. And that's good. That's the way it works, to be real and present and develop, trust, develop a relationship. Anyway, so as I said, psychedelics have helped me sort of illuminate my personality structure, basically how my personality formed in interaction with my parents and my family, my childhood family, and how how that happens, how one develops a defensive reaction to parental lack of love or poor parenting, and then how to change it. Is it changed through, beauty? Is it changed through tears? Or maybe both. So in seeing my own personality, I came to what I feel is the ground of my being, the soul. And the soul is a word I would never have used, 10 years ago, or, well, longer than that ago. But when I was starting out in my career, I would never have used the word soul, because it's mushy, and it's not scientific, and it's not demonstrable, it's not measurable. In fact, it's quasi-religious, and so, forget about that. But, my worldview has changed and expanded a bit in the last 20 years that I've been doing psychedelics again, since my college days, which were fun but kind of a waste of time. Because basically I spent my time talking and trading insights with my friends, which was nice and fun, but nowadays it's more meditative and going inside to the ground of my being, as I said. So psycheology is a word I like to use instead of psychology, or I use it purposely because it's kind of an awkward word to use, but it makes you think. Psychology is grounded in the psyche. That's what the study originally was. That's what the field originally was. So I want to talk a little bit about some clinical philosophy and some applications about that. And then I want to go into some big picture stuff about changing society, change on the collective level. So let's talk a little bit about change. Just, you can have some fun with some of the definitions of change. And it's heuristic, it's interesting to think about. People don't think about the word too much. But there's a really difference. You can have no change, so to speak, just a flat line on the graph. But of course, the passage of time is happening. So that's a certain change. If you think of an object that doesn't even move, the molecules decay. Change happens over time, even if it doesn't seem to. So you can have the flat line. Now you can have the angle like this, 45-degree angle, growth, a nice even slope, straight up all the way. Is that the way it happens? No, not really. More likely, it's stepwise development. Now, in this sort of graphic phase of the talk, if you can think of the flat line, what would be, a sine curve? I mean, think of the stock market, a ticker tape, where, like the up and down volatility is essentially averages to zero. Well, you could sort of generalize that change to a sine curve, up and down, up and in a regular way, like that. Again, average being flat. If you take that flat average and make it 90 degrees, and then take your sine curve on it, you have a nice stairway with a nice sort of energy sink on the horizontal part, and a nice impossible, and then a miracle occurs part on the upward, on the vertical. So for me, change is stepwise. You run into a hurdle, you transcend it, you overcome it, you mature it, you understand it, you get it, you grow. Sometimes it happens like that, like a quantum leap, aha, and sometimes not. But when you first encounter a wall, it's like, oh my God, I'll never, surmount this. It goes on forever. But then, of course, a miracle happens, some change of phase, and you get it. And when you look back down at the problem that you were facing back here, from the next stage, it's obvious, of course. But of course, you didn't see it back then. So, and then you begin to realize, well, wait, but that's not really a wall that goes on forever, I can't get over. That's just the vertical part of a stair. So change is stepwise. There's also a difference between change and development or maturation. Development is usually in stages, and we all see development in youth. Maturation is the process over time. Transformation, though. Now there's the word that's most associated or most sought after, really, in the psychedelics realm. And so, here, I'm going to skip to the bottom for a second. Can psychedelics, here's the real question, can psychedelics repair malfunctions in natural development? So you're going along unfolding, you're developing, and you have some sort of childhood trauma or deficit. It's anger or absence of love, the cold shoulder. Usually it's one, or the other. So you grow up with a defensive personality. The doctors call it neurosis. I don't like that word because it makes it medical. And while psychosis is medical, neurosis is developmental and natural and normal. It's the way we grow. So to pathologize human development or difficulties in human development is a real mistake, and really kind of tightens and makes progress in psychotherapy or personal development less likely, because people are sick. Oh my God, I'm sick. Cure me, doctor. So, can you repair malfunctions in natural development? What about, can you speed up the natural developmental process through psychotherapy or through psychedelics? So, it's not just you're repairing something that's wrong, but let's say you've repaired that. And now, can I speed it up? Can I go through my developmental stages faster? Can I become enlightened early? And then lastly, can it trigger immediate transformative change into novel areas, places that you were not slated to develop into beforehand? So that's sort of the approach I'm taking to this. But personality, to go back to the middle one, bullet, personality development is a strategy devised by a 2-year-old. Because, we're in our childhood family, we have the two, like Jupiter and the sun, the huge, massive bodies of our parents, blotting out all other influences. We don't know anything about what it's like in other families. We can't threaten to move out and get a job because we're 2 years old. And, so you try to be yourself. And for some, of their reasons, parents don't cherish that and don't nurture that. So you try again. And they get a little pissed off, maybe. And as a baby, I think it's built-in Darwinian knowledge. You don't want your caretakers to be pissed off at you because they could, infanticide happens, or they could neglect you or starve you, or, it's built in. I think it's survival. So eventually you punt to plan B, which is personality. Okay, what do you want me to be? And the baby interprets that in a simplistic way because the baby's developmental, sophistication, cognitive ability to, see the big picture, think of the future, take the other person's perspective. None of that is available. It's black and white. It's like a fireman or a ballerina. These are caricatures. Good and bad. You're mean. You're nice. Babies see it that way. And so they develop a personality. Okay, I'll be compliant, I'll be smart, I'll be sexy, I'll be funny, I'll be rebellious, those sorts of things. Those are like archetypes. So that's personality. It's not your true self. Your true self is the way you're born, and you see that with psychedelics, I believe. Your original, the ground of your being, how you were born, before your parents had at you, and you punted to, ego, to personality, to the part of you that's effective at interfacing with the world so it's safe. But it's not this part, the original part. Okay, so here's some of the clinical philosophy. As I said, our true and original self lies under the personality. Safety, really, Darwinian safety or love, as represented by love, is really the central issue of infancy. And so, if you don't get it, you punt to plan B. Personality is a version of ourselves devised by a strategy devised by an earlier version of ourselves. Neurosis is the natural, stepwise unfolding of human maturation. It's really not a pathology. It's about spiritual immaturity, at worst. But it's natural developmental process, leading from egocentrism of an infant, where it's all about the baby, me, all the way up through spiritual enlightenment or spiritual development. Successive loss of egocentrism. First it's me and mommy, then it's me and my spouse, me and my little family, me and my community. And the definition of self keeps expanding with maturity. Now I'm concerned about the ecology, about the planet, or spiritually speaking, I'm concerned about the universe as a whole, and I identify with that. That's why people who are advanced spiritual adepts will want to serve others, because the other is the same as the self, because you've expanded your definition of self. So in psychotherapy, really, the desire for change reflects the problem. You're not good enough. You were told you weren't good enough, and so you feel like you have to change to get better. It's what people say when they come into the doctor's office. I want you to make me better. Well, in a psychological doctor's office, better than what? Better than who you really are? That's what the search has been through the life. And the real answer, I think, is to just relax into who you are. Through empathy and acceptance, basically love, for both ourselves and our parents. Freud called the primal scene, when you see your parents having intercourse. But I've appropriated that word, and I call the primal scene the scene when your personality best reflects your personality formation. The one where, your mother looks at you askance, or your father, feigns care and doesn't really have it, or whatever it may be. Everybody has their own individual stories. So, I think when we look back at that, and we understand, perhaps through the use of psychedelics, we see our personality revealed from the public to the psychological to the core. And we begin to see that, we can disidentify with the public face. And use it, of course, as a skill, able to use the ego and interacting with the world, of course, but not thinking that's who you are. It's who you are down here, so you can disidentify with the personality and re-identify with the core self. So, how do you do it? When I first started tripping again as an adult, around the age of 40 or so, I felt that I wanted to go to a bliss state. Bliss state, when I first went to what I think of as a bliss state, or the ground of my being, or, love predominated. I understood. My problems weren't really problems. They were poignant developmental challenges. I had love and acceptance for myself. So that's a transcendent kind of approach. I wasn't really grappling with my psychological problems. I was really transcending them. Instead of coming in from the top down, battling my way down through my defenses, I kind of use psychedelics to come in from the bottom and melt the knots in my psychological muscle from the bottom up. And that was great. That was really beautiful. I learned so much, and it lasted about a week. About a week or so. And so, in my clinical work, I say I don't use psychedelics, but I certainly, told my clients about transcendence, and without really mentioning psychedelics to those who weren't really, in touch with it. But the idea was, melt from the bottom up with love, and like I said, it doesn't last. So the cathartic part is when you really just go there. You go down, not battling your way through, maybe opening yourself up with psychedelics perhaps, but going down to that primal that primal wound, that primal experience, the primal scene, and seeing it with adult eyes. Because when we first experience it, we're babies. And we don't, like I said, have the skills or the wherewithal to do anything about it. And so, we go to personality, and we take the real stuff, the stuff that got hurt, or abandoned, or what have you, that wasn't acceptable, and we bury that. This is an old story. This is sort of Psych 101. You bury it, right? But with psychedelics, then, you come and you see it. And some of my clients, I say, go down there, go to the basement, pry off the boards that you've nailed up so carefully, unlock the 16 locks, and go down. You're an adult now, go. And they go and they come up and they say, no, there's a monster down there. The monster said, go away, I'll scratch your eyes out. Oh my God, scratch your eyes out, you can't see what's going on. And I say, no, it's you, it's okay, go. Go with acceptance, relax, go with love. And because of the development of a trusting relationship with that person, they try again. And they go down and, sure enough, what do they see? Not a monster that's going to scratch their eyes out, but a little girl sitting in the corner, cowering. Their little girl, the early childhood, saying, go away, in tears, I'll scratch your eyes out. Not really meaning it like a little kid might do. And in that case, of course, you don't run away. You go over to the little kid, you pick her up, and squirming or whatever, and you bring her upstairs out of the basement, and you set her down at the dining room table with the rest of the personality. And it's public now. Because when you look at it with adult eyes, it's painful, very painful. But it's not fatal. It's not potentially fatal like it was when you were a kid. So it's not existentially scary. Because existentially scary you can't handle. You got to lock it away. But pain, we can cry, we can deal with pain. So as an adult, when you look at it and you realize what went on, through the use of psychedelics or guided imagery or other techniques, you begin to see what was going on, and you begin to release. The fear is gone. You begin to release. You begin to accept what you buried before and disidentify with the personality. So it's not neurotic anymore. So, the transcendent change reaches forward, it's proactive, it's beautiful, it's blissful. It's kind of like, an MDMA state in a way to, relax you and have you feel love for yourself. And the cathartic, removes the unconscious change. It's more, dealing with the things that are sticking you to the past. And of course, it's a dualistic dance. You need both. It's not one or the other. It's not the transcendent approach like I thought maybe it was. Nor is it the cathartic approach that some, psychologists rely upon. Something where you really, at a certain point, if you're fragile or if you're, not ready for it, catharsis can be inappropriate, can cause further closing down and defensiveness and avoidance. But if combined with the transcendent approach, which is filled with love and acceptance, it makes it easier to conduct a cathartic approach. So psychedelic psychotherapy, under the proper conditions, the FDA says safe and effective when used as directed, safety and efficacy, and there was an old aspirin commercial in the old days that said, we're safe and effective when used as directed. And I think of psychedelics that way. Safe and effective when used as directed. And the best, instructions for use of psychedelics are those that, are in the tribal environment, that have been developed over millennia of trial and error, but longitudinally over time, it adds up to good data. And, but we're not native peoples, we're not tribal peoples. So we want to translate those tribal truths, tribal guidelines, tribal rituals that instantiate the wisdom for safety and efficacy. We want to translate those into Western terms. And we're doing that. I wrote an article called The 10 Lessons of Psychedelic Psychotherapy Rediscovered. And it was basically about that, what we've learned in the West about set and setting and preparation and re-entry and things of that nature. You can all trace those back to tribal practices that they developed more naturally. So, I think stunted or skewed development can be addressed quite nicely through that illumination process with psychedelics. But it's not cognitive development in a pill. I can't imagine somebody, no matter how, healthy or at peace they were through the use through psychotherapy or the use of psychedelics, actually, developing cognitively at a faster pace than they would under any other circumstance if they were relaxed and open. But either way, you slice it through insight or change or even cognitive development, change takes a long time. I mean, insight, is really easy. Everybody gets flashes of insight, especially in psychedelics. In the psychotherapy office, people, come up with insights themselves, or they're shared by the therapist perhaps, and it takes a long, long time to change, because these are personality characteristics and processes that have been put into place over decades. So really, it's about I think about Cartesian duality. Descartes separated us into the spiritual realm, the soul, and the body, the material realm. And there's a lot of politics behind that, enabling people to charge interest in the commercial sphere, accommodating the Industrial Revolution and things of that nature. But it's really been an interesting experiment to split the two. Because in tribal times, of course, it was unitary. They hadn't been split by modernity, by Descartes, into this interesting experiment as to whether we could sort of, go to church on Sunday, and that takes care of the soul part. And then the other 6 days kind of, rape the environment as much as we could to get to be extractive, to take out the value and concentrate it in individuals' hands or countries' hands, that sort of approach. So we split, the judgmental, ethical part from the material part to, wonderful result in some ways, and to global warming and resource depletion, and probably a human dieback where billions of people will die within the next 50 years. So an experiment that failed, I think, or is in the process of failing. So you think of the tribal environment where it's unitary, where they have a holistic view toward themselves. We can't do that. We can't go backward, but we can go forward into an integral approach where we, re-heal Cartesian duality. But it's not the same as before the split, because before the split it's natural and unself-conscious. After the split, the reunification, where we become whole again, like we all really want to be in this room, I think, that process is one where your eyes are open, where you understand what we as a society have been through and how we've come back to an integral approach. I like to think of it as a spiral, where we start out integrated into nature in a tribal setting. I don't want to idealize it, but where we're integrated into the natural environment, but we die at 30 of an infection or something. And so if you think of it as a spiral coming just halfway around the spiral, 180 degrees, it would be modernity. You live to be 86, but you're completely alienated from nature and miserable. So, big accomplishment. But if you keep on, Bin Laden and Kaczynski wanted us to come back down to pastoral primitivism, but we can't do that. You have to power through, I believe, and come back around 360 degrees to a sort of a neo-tribal or a neo-pastoral approach that's, modern, or postmodern, really integral, but reflects our understanding of the value of a tribal setting. Like if tribal environments are 90 people on average, well, maybe we experiment with housing modules that are 90 people or something like that. A neo-tribalism. We have, there are methods for changing policies, for changing bureaucracies and policies. And one of the points of going through this process that I think we're all trying to go through is to, as I said before, to help others and to identify with a larger whole. And so it becomes really important, I think, to societal development, but also to our own personal development, to put our shoulder to the wheel and try to improve things. And to talk about think about the future of psychedelics, like Jill was talking about, really. And she made very good points about, this is a thought-provoking. Why isn't this happening? So to think about those issues, how it's going to come down, because I'm an optimist. I really do believe that psychedelics are in the process of being reintegrated into Western civilization. I think we're just about the only culture that hasn't used some visionary plant as part of their ritual practice or religious life. And I think we're in the process of reintegrating. And so I think that's a fascinating topic, really, of how it will work, how we can help it, and how it'll change us, and what is an integral society like? What is a postmodern society that's gone through industrialism and modernity and now returned to psychedelics in some way? How does that happen? Is it through medical practice only? Jill says, don't hold your breath for personal use. Well, perhaps religious. I don't know exactly. In fact, we can't know, because here we are, at this part, facing that wall. And we're not up there yet, looking back and saying how obvious it was. But inevitably, the synthesis of the duality is novel. It's not like, the components. It's different. So we're not going to really be able to know it, but we need to go forward toward it anyway with confidence and love that something, important will happen. Okay, I still got a little time. So clinical applications of all that philosophy. How does it work, in practice? So I'll give you metaphors, because the metaphors, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a story is worth 1,000 pictures. So metaphor really one sentence, 5 words can communicate volumes. So the little girl with mommy's lipstick. Okay, little girl sitting on the floor drawing a picture for mommy with creativity and love in her heart. It's a gift, and she's being very creative. How beautiful. Only problem is, the gift is being drawn with mommy's lipstick on the wall. Okay? The child is pure of heart. So now the mother comes in and sees it. Now, if the mother's not really mature, the mother will likely respond in one of 2 ways. Either anger or coolness, withdrawal of love. Either way is improper parenting and inadequate love. So, the little girl, what does she learn? She learns maybe not to be creative, or, maybe to hold back a bit and not, express, try what she felt like doing. And, a little bit of that can be great. That's proper parenting. But the anger or the coldness is improper parenting. When we're born, we're like a soft, malleable clay. We're like a sponge because, we're born incompletely developed, unlike, a fish that is spawned and starts feeding immediately. It takes us, years to grow physically and mentally as well. So, we're like a sponge. We soak up the tint of whatever we're given. And if it's love, we soak that up. The primal example of this for me is embodied in an Alex Gray painting of mother and child. And she's holding the infant, and the infant is suckling at the breast. And Alex, how he makes the circles and, the concentric circles of the energy patterns that flow out. Well, of course, he does that. But then in this picture, the eyes, between the baby's eyes and the mother's eyes, is the straight line from which all the curves sort of emanate. And that's the straight, direct line. And you can see joy and love in the mother's eyes. And the baby is soaking it up. So that's a sponge. That's soft, malleable clay. That's the baby learning that it's lovable. And then being able to go off in life and, take risks and stub its toe and, fall down and pick itself up and, continue through life. Because, nothing's perfect. When you try something new, you fail, always, until you master it, and then you succeed. So there's always failure, quote unquote, at the beginning. So love and self-confidence is what helps you, go through the failure, not think of it as failure. It's like when my kid was learning to walk, he'd fall all the time like any other baby. And I pretty soon learned it was fall, 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 walk. And that falling wasn't failure, it was just on the way to success. And so, 20 years later, a client comes in, say, I can't keep a relationship. Well, it's failed relationship, failed relationship, failed relationship, successful relationship. It's developmental. It's not pathological. So, with the imago process, so you get that from your parents. Why? Because your, let's say, mother has this question in her heart because of her parenting. Am I lovable? I'm not lovable. Yes, I am lovable. I'm not lovable. Yes, I am lovable. Well, the I'm not lovable part is really hard to handle. You don't want to be not lovable. So you repress it and you project it. You project it onto your spouse, but you also project it onto your child. No, that's not good enough. I love certain things about you, but that's not good enough. And the baby now has caught it. It's contagious. The baby now has the duality. I'm not good enough. Wait a minute, I am good enough. She tells me I'm not good enough. Wait a minute, I am good enough. That duality. So the baby grows up, and trying to get the parent to love it doesn't really work, launches into adulthood, goes with this duality. I'm not good enough part is hard to handle, hard to feel bad about yourself. So that part gets projected. Where? On your spouse. If you only change that thing, everything would be great. And, our difficulties, 90% your fault, 10% my fault. I'm like rounding error. If you would get your act together, my problems wouldn't really matter at all because you're the bad one. and I'm the good one. There's that duality again, projected out. So it's not 90-10, it's 50-50, or 45-55, or whatever. But when you begin to realize through seeing your personality illuminated and the process of personality development illuminated, you begin to say, wait a minute, it's not him, it's me. I'm projecting the bad part I don't want to deal with. Oh, shit. All right, I'm going to take it back. Now I've got this duality. I'm good enough. Wait a minute. That doesn't make sense. Why do I have this duality? I got it from my mom. You know, so there's the duality. So now I'm giving her back half of it. But wait a minute. It wasn't my duality at all. I was an innocent baby. She gets both halves. So now it's given back emotionally, attitudinally, to where it came from originally. And the baby, who's now an adult, can feel good about him or herself, rather than taking on the sponge, the tint of the neurotic, there's that word, toxic fluid that the sponge absorbs, if you will. Or the malleable clay analogy is, this is the malleable clay, and here's the parent with their personality, knocking against the child, until finally the child creates like a reciprocal template with which to go out and face the world and find, a spouse kind of like daddy or something like that. So making it conscious is key to reclaiming it and giving it back from where it came. So that's why, people come to me, they say, well, they just go around in vicious circle all the time. Why? Because of that template. They're a perfect fit, a perfectly awful fit. Because they're here and they're triggering down deep, and he's triggering down deep, and she's triggering. It's a really nice metaphor for the way it fits. And you can even extend the metaphor to say, once you've resolved some personality issues, you really meet soul to soul, like your palms match at the depth, at the deepest part of you coming together in relationship. And of course, as soon as you take back your projection on your spouse, you don't have to, do that anymore. The spouse starts doing it. Everything you wanted them to do, which you criticized them for, and they backed away. Once you take it back, and you say, oh, it was me all the time, I'm really sorry. It wasn't about you. They come forward. How can I help you? Oh, I love you. I want to be with you. Because they're off the hook. So they can begin to give you the love that you really deserve. So it's kind of paradoxical. Asking to change creates the opposite of change in a relationship situation. And accepting the other person, not as perfect, or not as the end point of their development, but as on the road to their development, and therefore perfect at every stage, kind of like fall, walk. When you accept them for where they are, then they begin to flower. So the rosebud open too early metaphor is kind of, it's like, you look at the child, and you say, well, I wish he or she was such and such. It's kind of like this rosebud that's in the process of flowering, of unfolding, but right now it's a tight little hard rosebud. It's early. And you go and you say, oh, I wish it was a flower already. It'd be so beautiful. So you go get your tweezers and start opening up, the rosebud, and of course it dies. That will never work. So it's not like that. It's about acceptance. So this top-down approach that I talked about is kind of like chasing a wily animal that's very fast, like maybe a ferret, and you trap it kind of in a rock outcropping, and it goes back into the back. So you reach in your hand to try to get it out. This is like, going in the top-down approach to addressing your problems and, sort of going in and digging to change and stuff like that. As opposed to accepting and loving yourself and having it unfold naturally. So you try to get the ferret, and you reach in, and the ferret backs away. And so you reach in a little further, and the ferret goes to the back of this little cave. And so you reach in a little further, the ferret scratches you. So the analogy for the opposite approach is watching the ferret go into the thing, sitting back, opening your picnic basket. What do ferrets eat? Let's say apples. Take a slice of apple and throw it near the entrance to the little cave. And you sit there and you wait. And however long it takes, eventually the little ferret takes it and runs to the back. Well, you know the story. You do that long enough, patient enough. Eventually the ferret's sitting on your lap eating apples. Because it's trust and it's not grabbing and pulling. It's safe. So, top-down resistance versus melt from the bottom up. Faith, the three-legged dog. That's a typo. Faith, the two-legged dog. Now, we've all seen three-legged dogs, right? Faith is a two-legged dog. She's amazing. She was rescued from a pound. She was born congenitally without her front legs. And she was crawling around like on her belly and everything. It was just kind of gross. And this couple came in and adopted her and taught her how to stand on her hind legs. And, you know, with three-legged dogs, we've all seen, two-legged dogs are kind of rare. But a three-legged dog we've all seen. Happy as a clam, right? Happy as four-legged dogs. Totally unaffected by this, you know, this disability or tragedy or whatnot. Not a tragedy at all. They're not going to commit suicide. They're not going to get depressed, etc. And Faith was that way, of course. A huge smile on her face, doggy smile. She was on the cover of some animal health magazine I saw in the health food store, and I just picked it up immediately because that cover was so beautiful, that beautiful doggy smile. And it turns out in the article, they took Faith to, they lived near an Air Force base, and they took her to the hospital where people came in who were amputees. And she would, you know, give faith to these people. So the point here is, you know, we have to try to, you know, see that big picture and cultivate the joy of life rather than the disability part. It's sort of like with the dying in these wonderful studies at Johns Hopkins and NYU. The psilocybin is meant really to not lengthen their life, but to allow them to live their lives, the rest 6 months or whatever they have, instead of living their death all the time. And that's kind of the analogy with faith. It's not about amputation, but it's about our own personal traumas from psychology. You know, we have to see it from a bigger perspective, and one that includes love, acceptance, you know, and that comes, you know, also from the psychedelic experience. But change, you know, the analogy here is the sapling. Boulder rolls down the hill and falls on a sapling, and it makes the sapling horizontal. Doesn't kill it, though. So what happens? The sapling continues to grow. It goes like this up to the sun. And the flat part has the boulder on it and stays there. But the growing tip in this example continues. Okay, 20 years later, a really friendly farmer comes along and sees this scene and recognizes what happened. He says, oh, that poor tree. Let me get my crowbar and pull that boulder off. Well, okay, does the tree, now tree, not sapling, go? Of course not. The tree stays right down there. And it's the same sort of thing, I think, with our own personal issues. You know, you'll never be a person whose father didn't beat you. You'll never be a person whose parents didn't get divorced. You'll never be a person whose older brother didn't traumatize you. You know, these things aren't going to change through psychotherapy. You always have that history. The difference is acceptance, like Faith, the two-legged dog, through getting in touch with your true self and, you know, and emanating love and acceptance. You go through like a seed going through its natural stages. Maybe, you know, bad parenting could be an overhanging, shadowy rock ledge. So the flower goes like this instead and grows skewed. So there's that analogy, poor parenting, skewed development. But there is this natural unfolding that we're pre-programmed to do. It's like a seed. So if given love, like a seed, if given, you know, sunshine, good soil, water, so given in human development, love, safety, proper feeding, resources, but mostly safety and love, then, you know, the child is more likely to unfold according to that natural developmental template that we all have. And it goes from infancy, dependency, through to spiritual development. And, you know, I spell spiritual with a small s, because I don't think of it as supernatural. I think of it as merely the most advanced end of normal human development, is wisdom. Wisdom. My son is my guru. You know, he's 11 now. When he was a baby, those of you with kids probably have the same exact experience. He was perfect. He was so, like, you know, now we've all made him neurotic, of course, like everybody. But, you know, he's still my guru, really. But when he was a baby, it was perfection. I thought of him as an emissary from the land of perfection, somebody from another dimension, you know, who was a full adult and fully developed with heart and soul, but didn't know how to use his body yet, so he couldn't talk or he couldn't walk and stuff like that. And as he learned how to use his body, he forgot that he came from this land of perfection. But he would say things to me like, you know, well, you know, why do I have to sleep in my own bed, Dad? Or you and Mom sleep together? And I say, well, of course, you have to sleep in your own bed because well, you know, you have to say that it's very important for a child to, and you know, so he reminded me of things, love, affiliation, that were still in him just naturally, that we as adults sometimes get filtered out. So it was a beautiful learning experience to be with him. And as I said before, you let go of this next bullet. You let go of your criticism of your spouse for not doing something. You treat them with love and acceptance. Boom, they start doing that thing, not being pushed away. So psychology is often the science of opposites. You're scared of something, you deny it. It's repression, it's projection. Those are all like opposites. It's really kind of cool. So when somebody comes in and they're like, oh, I don't know. They're extreme in some way. Let's say they're, I don't know, a drug abuser, not just a user, but an abuser, and they're out there acting out, sexually or whatever it may be. Well, that's like the sort of, if they're a center, that's sort of like extreme, right? But you have to think of opposites. If they're that bad, what's the opposite number of that? Is where they really want to be in their heart. The perfection they're really driving toward. That's always in there underneath. So there's the public face, and there's always this sort of equal and opposite internal part that you're not sharing. And the public face becomes exaggerated and dramatic because you're hiding from the thing you don't want to reveal, which is like the opposite. I'm not good enough, or what have you. Some influences, Assagioli, who invented psychosynthesis, a wonderful synthesis of Eastern philosophy and Western psychoanalysis. And he talks about subpersonalities and the core self. It's really quite wonderful. I recommend him to you. Sandor Ferenczi, who is, after I developed my clinical practice as an adult, I read him, I encountered him and found that he had, devised everything that I've come up with, like 50 years earlier. But he believed in developing a relationship and trust and being real with your clients and, opening up and developing even personal relationships with your client. Of course, if you do that, if you dare to do that, it requires that one be analyzed to rock bottom, Ferenczi said. And who's analyzed to rock bottom? So you have to worry about issues of transference, and especially the more open and real and public you are, the more it's important to remember to retain your purpose. Why are you there? As a therapist, why am I there? I'm there to serve them. I'm there to help heal them. I'm there for a purpose that's for their benefit. And there's an exchange of value, of course. They give me money, and I try to help them, but that's my purpose. It's not to show off or to be me just because I want to be me. It's if I'm going to use myself as an example, it better be for a good reason. So I'll just flip through really quickly, and I won't really take extra time, even though I'm the MC. I don't want to do that. Just let me tell you that that in my clinical practice, there's sort of different perspectives that I've seen. Let me sort of close with this. A material view of visionary plants as, with the pharmaceutical chemicals inside them, dealing with endogenous neurotransmitters. There's the second level view, I think, as the psychological view of healing, pathology, which is not the mechanistic view, but still a view of illness. And the spiritual view of us as incarnate energy, as everything is, I believe, in the entire universe. There have been some different approaches that have been helpful for me. Ayahuasca has been remarkable. Yoga, meditation, Tantra, Ayurveda. I said Ayurveda. And lastly, matching those three different perspectives, the personal and societal development. First, I think we think of ourselves as separate from our true selves, and also from everyone else around us. Secondly, we maybe get in touch with our personal psychology. We feel love for ourselves, but we still kind of curse the guy who cuts you off, on the highway. But the third level, I think, is when we're connected not just to ourselves, but to others. And we have, a sense of spiritual love and fundamental unity or identity with those that we interact with. And that's, I think, where this process leads us to. There's one last slide, which I won't go into, which is talking about changing society and about the big picture of, change into an integral society. And I'll be happy to discuss that with any of you if you want to come up afterward. So, and lastly, let me just give you this little thing. This is opportunities for follow-up. If you want to see any of the writings or interviews or presentations that I've done, the PowerPoints. They're all up at my website, and you can just go to nealgoldsmith.com/psychedelics. Excuse me. And my clinical practice website, which doesn't mention the word psychedelics, is nealgoldsmith.com. You can't click to /psychedelics from anywhere in the site. And there's the URL for the book at Inner Traditions. It'll be out in January. When you take a look at it, if you do, give me some feedback. I'd really, really appreciate that a lot. So I'll call that to a close. Any questions, please? Thank you. So who has a question?
Hello.
Yes.
Thanks. When you talk about your work being psychedelically inspired, is that mainly through the use of ayahuasca, would you say, or
mainly through the use of ayahuasca, you're asking?
Right. What substance do you feel is most conducive for therapy in your practice or in your life?
First of all, many of you probably know or feel this way too, but for me, psychedelics are more similar to one another than they are, than psychedelics are similar to any other substance, like cough medicine or whatnot. So, I think of it as almost like alcohol, where you can have wine or brandy or vodka, but it's all basically alcohol. And it's not true chemically with the psychedelics, but the psychedelic experience has certain things in common, I think, no matter what psychedelic you take. Whether it can be useful in psychotherapy, I think, is there are differences in the effects. Ayahuasca is a little bit more dissociative, like DMT is dissociative, whereas psilocybin is gentler, and they're using it predominantly psilocybin in the research studies now at the medical schools. Personally, I've done mushrooms in the past and sort of honed in on that a little bit for me personally. I like the fact that with psilocybin intoxication, it's called, one of the first symptoms is often yawning. And I thought, well, that's kind of the opposite of white knuckles, isn't it? But as far as therapy is concerned, I think the bigger issue is how long it lasts, and also how reliable it is to create a certain space. But psilocybin is relatively short-acting. It's not as long, it's like 4 to 6 hours or something like that, as opposed to 10 or 12 hours or 8 to 12 hours with LSD. So you have to think of the poor therapist who has to sit there for all those times. That's why they tried using DMT in the 60s, because it was so short-acting. They called it the businessman's trip, but because you could do it on your lunch hour. But I'm not sure how effective that psychotherapy was, because it is rather dissociative until you get used to it. Other questions?
Hello, sir. Your last slide was really, I think, significant. You didn't get a chance to discuss it. So could you touch upon quickly on how do we move forward from the modern society to the integral one?
Sure. Well, I think, the healing of Cartesian duality is an important part of that, because the integral, phase is sort of, that's the definition of the integral phase. Let's see if I can speak to this just briefly. Well, I've talked about a lot of these in the course of the talk. Basically, for me, psychedelics are a window, not a door, really, a door of perception, but really a window. You can see, your developmental processes and maybe even, your developmental path. So I think psychedelics are catalytic, really important in our personal change, and society changes collectively, through collective change. Collectively over all of us as individuals, and so so I think that's a natural process society is going through right now. I think we're sort of waking up, after really a 500-year dream that we might be able to act in a mechanistic way without consequences. So. That's why it's important. I call that second bullet right action, Buddhism and psychedelics policy, because, when you get the message, not only do you hang up, like Ram Dass said, but, you get active. You go out into the world and try to help things. It's like the Buddhist monks in the old days in Vietnam who were activists. I think that's, important. So, like I said, I think the duality of mind and body, or, spirit and flesh, or those dualities are outmoded experiments. It's not a versus anymore. The question sometimes becomes, is it mind or is it neurotransmitters? Is there something soulful or special or non-material about one's, about our minds or our souls, or is it just neurotransmitters? Is it just brain chemistry? And I think of that answer, that's a duality, of course. And so the answer is neither. Anytime you see a duality like that, any duality, you got to know that neither side is going to end up winning. It's always going to be some transcendent, synthetic synthesis, some third option. So, what's the third option between a neurotransmitter approach and a soul, this immaterial soul approach? The answer is yes. The answer is, one thing, that they actually are the same thing, that DMT is the spirit molecule, Rick says. So, the chemicals in our brains are patterned energy, incarnate love. And the mind itself has a physiological substrate, of course. It's one whole thing. And to dualize it by saying, is it chemical or is it soul, is the problem. It's not the question. You can't answer that question. There's no question to that to the duality question, which is it? Because you have to rethink it and realize that it's whole, and it's not, it transcends that duality. Other questions?
Hi. You said before that insights are easy and change takes a long time. So, from psychedelics, people always report all sorts of insights. Do you, or have you thought about ways to use clinically, or just as a, someone to go through a thought process themselves, once they gain an insight, to actually affect change? Is there a way to use your psychedelic experience or psychedelics for the process of change beyond the insight?
Hello? Am I on? Yes. I think seeing the personality structure and the process of personality development really helps change. I think that's not just an insight, that's a re-education. The first week or so, a few weeks with new clients, I spend educating them really about this perspective on personality development. And it's almost always new to them. Because it's repressed. I mean, the process isn't that sophisticated or arcane. It's just, in their practical implementation of it, it's fear-based, so it's hidden. And so when I remind them of that process that they really already know already, in a context of love and acceptance, sort of in a way reparenting them, not, such that they would get dependent on me for that reason, and not that it wouldn't be explicated and verbalized, to model what good parenting should have been. Because I really like my clients, I love them, I'm very fond of them, and I really have empathy for them. So I'm modeling some parental traits just in those attitudes. And hopefully, because it's verbalized, it's not just, developing into a transference relationship, it's verbalized, that they then can see it as a model and begin to adopt those lessons I teach them in the first few weeks, and over the course of our relationship, the kind of treatment I give them. So that education at the very beginning is really important. To show them, to teach them about this perspective on personality development. So that's good for change. And then on the other end of things, once you've really maybe worked out some of the knots in your psychological muscle and begun to feel more healthy and act more healthy, then it becomes time to take responsibility for a larger whole. Get right with your family, be involved with your community or the PTA, or even on a larger scale. Begin to become an activist in a way, an activist for love, really, for change in society, for the integral perspective. Hope that answered your question.
Well, when you were talking about projecting sort of personal issues and relationships, it sort of illuminated something for me, kind of took me from that trough to the crest, almost like you were saying, but there's still something I've sought for the answer to in psychedelics and haven't always found it. The sort of motivation or determination then once you stop projecting to make that change. How does that change integrate? Where do you find that?
Okay. Change is not the answer. Change is not the goal. I'd like to ask Danielle next. It's not about change. It's about acceptance of where you are right now and not trying to figure it all out and change, but to just let it unfold. And it only unfolds our gut, our core, our soul really, only unfolds unimpeded, unskewed, in a context of love and safety and acceptance. So it's not about change. If you see personality development and you see it, if you see it, and you also see it not just insightful or intellectually, but you see it in terms of that core of love, the ground of our being, which is really perfect and pure love. When you see it in that safety way with love and acceptance, then you relax. You're not picking on yourself. Yourself isn't going deeper and hiding from that frontal assault. And I can unfold. And so the change happens, the development happens naturally. It's not really change. It's better thought of as development. One of my first trips of the adult era was I had this thought as I sort of closed my eyes and went into the experience going deeper and deeper. I felt like I was going underground. And when I went underground, I saw these roots. And I knew those were my psychological roots. And so I said, cool, this is like the beginning of this tripping experience. I was still kind of in the straight world too. I said, I'll go fix them, perfect. So I zoomed in my mind's eye with the intent of like picking and fixing and examining. And my roots went, and recoiled, for my scrutiny. So I said, all right, later for that, because it was not pleasant, and I kept going down, down, down. And I saw at the bottom this glowing, throbbing mound. And I knew that was the ground of my being. And so I went down and I touched it, and I felt pure love and understanding and forgiveness and empathy for myself and my family. And I just came back up. And as I came back up and I saw my roots, I didn't want to pick anymore. I said, oh, I get it. I understand. It's okay. It's okay. And my roots went, and opened up to me. So psychology is the science of paradox. Psychology is really the science of psycheology. But the paradox is, the more you try to change, the more damage it does, the more fear is created. It's just enacting the problem you inherited from your parents. They told you weren't good enough, you better change. So efforts to change backfire. There's a wonderful book called Working on Yourself Doesn't Work. And that would be my philosophy on that. So I think I'm going to call me to an end. Thank you very much.